Welcome to the second devlog for Plant Tales. It's been a while since my last update, but in that time I've added a whole heap of stuff to the game. Today I want to talk about exploration, which alongside running your plant shop is basically what the other half of the game is about. You go out, find new plants, collect resources, deal with whatever dangers you might encounter, and then come back to turn it all into profit. Exploration has genuinely been one of the most challenging aspects to design and build for this game, but it's also been some of the most fun and rewarding. It's still very much a work in progress, but let me take you through where I'm at with all these systems and how I've been building them, starting with procedural generation. I've always had a fascination with large, open, procedurally generated worlds, but I'm well aware that procedural generation can be a bit of a double-edged sword. The randomness that drives it is great for replayability, but left completely unchecked, it can make a world feel aimless and lacking a clear sense of progression. So one of the ways I want to prevent this issue is by creating distinct biomes of increasing difficulty, and then having some way to make sure the player encounters them in mostly the right order. Since the player starts in the town at the bottom of the map, my first instinct was to have a fixed layout with these layers. Rainforest near the start, then meadow, then desert. However, while the progression was clearly there, it also unfortunately made exploration feel incredibly linear. So eventually I scrapped that plan and switched to a new layout, taking a bit of inspiration from how the game Core Keeper handles its biomes. The new layout also has room for 7 biomes as opposed to the initial 3. And it might not be the final layout, but I do think it's a step in the right direction. One key component of generating the world is noise. The biome borders, creeks, and cliffs all rely on noise algorithms to generate these natural-looking shapes. There are a few different noise options to choose from, but throughout development I've been experimenting with both cellular noise and Perlin noise. It's a bit of a long story as to why I originally chose cellular noise, but just know I'm currently considering moving away from it due to complexity reasons. Regardless, various layers of noise are combined to create a height map. Dark values become creeks, and light values become these areas of higher elevation. When I first started this game, I actually had no plans to include elevated terrain. It's a notoriously difficult thing to achieve in a top-down 2D game, and thinking about all the custom Y-sorting logic I would need to add sounded like a huge headache. But one day I sat down and realized there might be a way to achieve the illusion of height without any custom Y-sorting logic, which is an idea mostly inspired by the cliffs in Factorio. These cliff tiles are designed in a specific way so that simply placing them on top of flat ground is enough to create the illusion of elevation. And I got so excited by the idea of these fake cliffs that I had to at least give it a try. So after many broken attempts, this is what I've ended up with. The player, trees, and foliage always render in front of the cliff tiles, while the ground tiles always render behind. Not only is there no complicated Y-sorting, but all these cliff tiles live on just a single tile map layer. This means I can create mountains as tall as I want without running into performance issues. So how does it work? Well, to get the cliff tiles to automatically orient themselves, I decided to use some custom bit masking logic. Normally, bit masking for auto-tiling works by looking at how a tile connects to its neighbouring tiles. Each edge or corner is assigned a bit, which you can think of as an on-off switch. The active bits get combined to form a number, and that number is then used to look up the matching sprite in your tile set. But for my cliff tiles, instead of checking the neighbouring tiles, I check the neighbouring height values. If the neighbour is supposed to be lower, the bit is set to 0. And if it's supposed to be at the same level or higher, it's set to 1. And this basically just prevents neighbouring cliffs on different height levels from connecting to each other weirdly. I still use Godot's lovely UI to configure the bit masks, but then this script is what actually determines which particular tile sprites to place out in the world. Of Of course, the downside to this method of cliff tiles is that the illusion can break sometimes, especially if I'm not careful. And I'm still ironing out some missing tile edge cases. So for now, that pretty much covers how the world is shaped. But what fills it is just as important. And not all of it is going to be friendly. Nature can be beautiful, but it can also be a little scary. Each biome will have its own set of creatures to watch out for, and so far they are all bug-themed. The combat system still needs a lot of work, but it adds a nice layer of tension that would otherwise be missing. The bugs don't just serve as obstacles though. They also drop a very useful item I'm calling insect dust. Eventually, the player will be able to craft a composter and use the insect dust to make fertilizer, which is an item that can be used to instantly grow your plants or cause them to spread. Another useful resource you'll come across is wild clay, which comes in various different types depending on the biome. If you bring this clay back, you can use it to craft pots, an essential component of any plant shop. My idea is that higher tier pots will result in a direct multiplier to the sale price of your plants, and they can be used as decoration too, of course. How the wild clay appears is something I struggled with quite a bit though. I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure wild clay is usually found embedded directly in the ground, or along the side of a creek like in this example. However, my previous attempts to embed the clay into the ground didn't turn out very well, so that's why I decided to retexture the rock sprites as a workaround. Maybe I'll revisit the design again later though, we'll see. Another way I'm trying to make this world feel worth exploring is by scattering plenty of handcrafted structures around. Some spawn completely at random, but others are key locations whose positions are generated the moment you start a new game. The way I build these structures is just as separate scenes in the editor. The tiles, loot spots, and any other interactive elements are essentially copied into the world as required, and the regular procedural generation fills in the gaps. One limitation with my current setup is that structures have to fit within a single chunk, so I'll probably need to rework this if I ever want to add something really large. One particularly important type of structure is the waypoint. To avoid making players have to retrace their steps every time they go exploring, I wanted to add a fast travel system. You'll stumble across waypoints naturally, but they'll appear broken at first. Waypoints are supposed to mark real moments of progression, so to make it feel a bit more special, my idea was that you have to restore and power them using some kind of item. And the item I decided to go with is runestones. They are also scattered throughout the world, waiting to be found as you explore. This means I'll need to balance their frequency carefully though. I want them to feel a bit scarce, but not so rare that they completely block your progress. Anyway, once the player has collected enough, they can then fill in the missing stones to activate the Waypoints portal. This waypoint system has gone through quite a few iterations to get here, and I still have more ideas on how to improve it further. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how it's coming together. Definitely beats walking all the way back. One last thing I'd like to touch on is chunk loading, because I find the engineering behind it quite interesting. Of course, the entire world can't be loaded in all at once. That would lead to terrible frame rate and memory issues. So it's broken up into chunks that load and unload dynamically around the player. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? The problem is, simply dividing the world into chunks doesn't guarantee a smooth frame rate. How they load in is just as important. For my game, each chunk is packed with heaps of tiles, entities, and logic. In the past, whenever even a single one loaded in, it caused these yucky, noticeable frame stutters. The tempting fix for this stutter problem is usually multi-threading. Simply offload the heavy computations onto a background thread and the main thread will become unblocked, letting the game run smoothly again. Unfortunately for me though, it wasn't that simple. This is because in game engines like Godot or Unity, some actions actually can't be moved to a background thread. There are strict rules about what is considered thread safe and what is not. As it turns out, placing tiles on an active tile map, which is where my bottleneck was, is not thread safe. So I hunted around for some alternatives. One method that worked quite well for me is something called time slicing, otherwise known as frame spreading. Instead of trying to shove a massive task into a single frame, we can break it into tiny slices and spread them across multiple frames. We execute one slice, let the engine render the frame, and then pick up where we left off in the next one. As for how to achieve this in code, there are many ways, but personally I ended up using async await with Godot's signals. To show you how it works, imagine a nested loop responsible for generating all the tiles in a chunk. To spread the execution over multiple frames, we can simply await the engine's next frame somewhere inside the loop. This line basically says, hey, stop this function early, but come back next frame and pick up exactly where you left off. By placing the await in the outer for loop, the chunk now loads in at a rate of 1 column per frame. Not too bad. As an experiment, if we were to put it in the inner loop instead, it would load in at a rate of 1 tile per frame, which is definitely way too slow. While both these cases do fix the frame rate stutter, it would be nice to figure out the most optimal number of tiles to load per frame. Ideally, you only want to slice up the task just enough to avoid stutters without dragging out the load time. So this is where a time budget comes in. We track how many microseconds have passed, and only if we exceed the time limit do we then stop and yield to the next frame. This guarantees that each slice won't hog more than its fair share of the frame time, while still loading the chunk as fast as possible. For my game, that sweet spot averages out to about 137 tiles per frame, though it varies quite a bit as you can see from this histogram. Just a word of caution, do be careful if you try this method of time slicing. Asynchronous code has plenty of quirks, and it's easy to accidentally introduce other bugs or race conditions. My real chunk generation code is also much more complicated than this example. But regardless, time slicing is a handy little trick to be aware of when multi-threading isn't practical. And I hope some of you find it interesting too. Overall, that's pretty much where the world generation is at right now. There's still a lot left to do, of course. Balancing, more creatures, more structures, more resources, more everything really. But the foundations are there, and seeing it all slowly come together is really exciting. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if the game sounds like something you'd enjoy, please consider wishlisting. Until next time, thanks for watching.